Hello. Before I begin, let me just say you are free to skip this part. It is not important. It is simply an explanation for the future of this, for lack of a better term, series. I've been looking into new ways in which to increase the upload rate of this channel, and I think this is one of the best ways to do it. If you haven't already guessed by the title of this video, then let me spell it out for you. Every month I'm going to give my thoughts and opinions on books I've recently read. Now, I'm not a fast reader by any means. On top of this, I have other commitments outside of the YouTube world that sometimes make reading a significant number of books a month difficult. However, I wanted to start off strong with the first episode, and so took the time to read as much as possible throughout August. For the average person, actually trying to read a lot of books may result in nearing double figures. For me, the less than average plodder reader, it means 4. Due to this inability to read words at a fast pace, I must warn you that the number will differ throughout the months, especially if the book is War and Peace or Gravity's Rainbow. Basically, if the book is a doorstopper, then I will focus on a deeper analysis, rather than trying to squeeze in more books for the month, just for the sake of it. Each of these episodes will be uploaded within a few days following the month in which the books were read. The reasoning behind this is so I can have time to digest what I have read, write up a comprehensible script, record, edit, etc., without having to rush it out for the sake of a deadline. Additionally, I would also like to get the people interested in this channel involved. To do this, I urge you to let me know which books you'd like me to read next in the comments. Now, I can't promise one suggestion will guarantee that book's arrival on the next or even the next 10 uploads. However, by simply suggesting a book in the comments, it will be stuck on my books to be read list. I'm the sort of person who doesn't plan what he's going to read next. I operate on how I'm feeling at the time. So, if you do put in a suggestion, it might just steer my mind towards whatever attractive quality that book holds, whether that be its name, style, or name value of the author. And by the time I reach that limbo stage between books, it may be the book you suggested getting read next. If it is, I'll make sure to mention you. That's pretty much it. It is a bit of a departure from the usual, but at least it's something. I guess it's my idea of a podcast. Something to stick on in the background whilst you're at work, cooking, going to the gym, or any other activity where my stupid voice won't put you off the task at hand. I hope it will suffice. This month's reading was inspired by my inability to comprehend Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. If you saw my last video, you would understand my recent exploration of surrealism, an exploration influenced by my viewing of the new Ari Aster movie Beau is Afraid. One note I left out of the video was that watching Beau is Afraid inspired me to give Gravity's Rainbow a go. I've had the book on my shelf for years, but I've been building up to reading it. I thought it best to get around to reading it once I had tackled some of Pynchon's more digestible work. And I since had. I have tackled and enjoyed Inherent Vice and The Crying of Lot 49, but despite this I needed that kick to get into Gravity's Rainbow. The kick was Beau is Afraid, and after reading 200 pages, just falling short of completing the first chapter, I acquiesced. I needed something somewhat comprehensible. I needed something familiar, and that need led to me picking up another book that had been lying unattended on my shelf for quite some time. It was around a few days into the reading of this first book that I got the idea for this video. Subsequently, I decided to tackle shorter and easily digestible books in order to hit the magic 4. Either way, with no further interruptions, here is the first book I read. Brighton Rock by Greene. Brighton Rock was published in 1938 and is a crime thriller set in, you guessed it, Brighton. Greene first came on my radar when I was scouring a list of book recommendations by Anthony Bourdain. The list included 3 books by Greene, only one of which I picked up, that being his 1955 novel The Quiet American. I loved it. Greene's command of the English language and ability to paint scenes gripped me. So much so that I moved on to his 1951 novel The End of the Affair, my favourite of his, and then The Power and the Glory, published in 1940. Greene was right up my alley, and after learning about his life corresponding for various news outlets in dangerous parts of the world, I kind of began to see him as an English Hemingway. He was a man whose life seemed to fall in line with, and sometimes be even more exciting than, the lives of those he wrote of. The book begins with a man called Fred Hale, who is going around Brighton leaving cards that, if found, can be traded in for a cash prize. Whilst doing this, Hale is on the lookout as a gang located in Brighton is out to get him. To protect himself, Hale tries to find somebody to be with to prevent the gang from killing him. Hale stumbles upon a woman called Ida Arnold. After some time together, the two arrive at Brighton Pier. Ida tells Hale that she is going to quickly freshen up in the toilet, yet when she returns, Hale is gone. He was killed. The story thus focuses on the leader of the gang who killed Hale, Pinky. Greene describes Pinky in a manner unbefitting of a leader of a violent gang. He is short, hunched over, has narrow shoulders, and is only 17 years of age. However, despite his outward appearance, Pinky is a sociopath whose evil has no boundaries. Following the death of Hale, Pinky and the gang set out to form alibis to cover their tracks. One of the ways in which they do this is to continue the distribution of Hale's cards throughout Brighton. The job is undertaken by the oldest guy in the gang, named Spicer, who left one of the cards in a bar called Snow's. Pinky tells Spicer that if he was seen in the bar putting down a card at whatever table he sat down at, it would be easy to discern that he had placed them and not Hale, thus ruining their alibi. Pinky thus goes to retrieve the card before it gets found. Unfortunately, it is gone by the time he arrives, as it had been picked up by one of the waitresses. The waitress's name was Rose. The story thus turns into an untangling of the gang's what should have been watertight alibi. Additionally, the woman Hale was with, Ida Arnold, begins to investigate the matter of Hale's death, as she does not believe the official story that was put in the papers. That story was that Hale had died of natural causes. To cover his tracks, Pinky's methods of suppressing the truth coming out get more ruthless throughout the story. He kills members of his own gang, and manipulates Rose to fall in love with him and marry him, so she will not be legally required to testify against him should the police get suspicious. In the end, Pinky encourages her to join him in a suicide pact, although he does not intend to fulfill his side of the bargain. However, at the last minute, these plans are thwarted by the arrival of Ida Arnold and a policeman she brought with her. Pinky, in a rage, throws himself off a cliff and dies. Greene wrote this book with the intention of having it put to film, which it was. I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if Greene thought like this for the majority of his works, as his writing often paints cinematic images in the reader's mind. Greene's scenes will almost be described like an establishing shot in a film, and typically the point of view comes from an outside source. This is something I appreciate about Greene because certain scenes still stick in my head so vividly even now. In Brighton Rock, the scene that sticks in my head the most is the scene when Pinky and Rose go on their first date, the beginning of Pinky's manipulation of her. Greene describes the flowing of water at Brighton Pier Harbour, the rain, the thunder, and the colour of the lights hanging above the various shops and restaurants. I think it's just a me thing, because I always appreciate well described scenery, but to me, that whole chapter is so aesthetically pleasing to read. By far the most compelling character in the novel is Pinky. Pinky's demeanour and external features remind me of an overly aggressive chihuahua. Unsure of itself, a chihuahua will show its teeth and bark loudly to ward off any threats, those threats being anything bigger than a chihuahua, which is almost everything. In other words, Greene does a good job of portraying not a seasoned gang leader, but a shit-scared kid, desperate to gain some sliver of respect. Greene does this from the off by constantly referring to Pinky as the boy, not the leader, the man, or even Pinky, just the boy. The reason why, of course, is that Greene wanted to further emphasize Pinky's inferiority complex. This complex is presented numerous times in the book, and is the guiding force that essentially leads to his death. Early in the book, Pinky is brought to a man named Coloni's HQ, called the Cosmopolitan. Colony was the leader of the rival gang in Brighton. When Pinky arrives, he is personally attacked by Colony's good fortune, and when offered a role in Colony's mob, he refuses out of pride. A few days later, Pinky and Spicer are attacked by Colony's mob, to which Pinky runs away screaming for his life. Lastly, Pinky's inferiority over his virginity continually is referred to in the book. Scarred by a childhood that saw Pinky sleep in the same room as his parents whilst they had sex, Pinky was both disgusted with the act as well as secretly ashamed of himself for not having performed it. This turns around when Pinky and Rose consummate their marriage later in the book. However, Pinky's feelings towards sex and Rose herself seem to flip-flop between hatred and affection. All in all, Pinky's complex drives, motivations, and most importantly pride, make him a far more compelling character than an outwardly evil mob boss ever could be. Don't get me wrong, he is evil, but understanding why, to some extent, he is evil definitely adds some layers to his overall arseholery. One of the most savage aspects of this book is the ending. Around 2/3 into Brighton Rock, Pinky and Rose are walking along the Brighton Pier when Rose convinces Pinky to step into a recording booth to record a message she can listen to later. The couple were previously arguing, and to keep Rose happy and keep her as a worthy alibi, Pinky agrees to do it. Yet, whilst in the booth, he records himself calling her every name under the sun. Rose, having not heard anything, takes the vinyl with glee, expecting one day to listen to a message full of love and devotion, but she was obviously mistaken. This vinyl floats around the remainder of the narrative and keeps you wondering when it's going to be played, or at least it did for me. The moment it does get played, however, was a lot more gut-wrenching than I had expected. In the last chapter, Rose goes to a priest and confesses her sins. Her confession is not that she has been with Pinky and knowingly got tangled up in a boy who had murdered to cover his own back. No. She was repenting the fact that she didn't take her own life when he did. Afterward, she walks along Brighton and ruminates on Pinky, telling herself that he will always exist to her. To hell with everyone else. She doesn't regret a thing. Suddenly, she remembers something. The vinyl, located in Pinky's old room, which was in a place called Frank's. Greene then ends the book with these lines. She turned out onto the front, opposite the palace pier, and began to walk firmly away from the direction of her home towards Frank's. There was something to be salvaged from that house and room. Something else they wouldn't be able to get over. His voice speaking a message to her. If there was a child, speaking to the child. If he loved you, the priest said, that shows. She walked rapidly in the thin June sunlight towards the worst horror of all. I thought that ending was great. Whilst I could appreciate aspects of this book, I did kind of find myself not enjoying it as much as The Quiet American and The End of the Affair. Brighton Rock was a good read, but simply was just not as good as anything I had read before by Greene. When pondering why, I have found it difficult. I think it is just the story itself. I found myself more intrigued by the characters and the aesthetics of the location in which they were placed, rather than whether Pinky would successfully keep Ida Arnold from uncovering Hale's murder. Overall, I think it's also because I loved The Quiet American and The End of the Affair a hell of a lot, so they would have been hard to surpass. 3 out of 5 stars. We'll go to the floor, the boy said, paying his 3 shillings as carelessly as if he always went there, and walked out among the little tables, the dancing partners with bright metallic hair and little black bags, while the coloured lights flashed green and pink and blue. Rose said, "It's lovely here. It reminds me," and all the way to their table she counted over aloud all the things of which it reminded her. The lights, the tune the band was playing, crowd on the floor trying to rumba. She had an immense store of trivial memories, and when she wasn't living in the future, she was living in the past. As for the present, she got through that as quickly as she could, running away from things, running towards things, so that her voice was always a little breathless, her heart pounding at an escape or an expectation. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? By Philip K. Dick. Published in 1968, Do Androids is a dystopian science fiction / noir thriller novel. I first discovered this book when watching Blade Runner 2049. During the viewing, a friend turned to me and said, "Did you know the original Blade Runner is based off a book?" "I did not," I replied. My friend then told me the name of the book, and I liked the title so much I bought it. The book sat around on my shelf for a week before reading it, as I was still getting through Brighton Rock at the time. Whilst getting through Brighton Rock, I thought I'd give the original Blade Runner a watch, whilst I was with some friends. I wish I could tell you my thoughts on that, but the issue was that we spent the whole film talking, so barely even paid attention. I intend to rectify that mistake in the near future, but either way, to the book. To sum up the plot, the book centers around the killing, or retiring as the book puts it, of 6 replicants by a bounty hunter called Rick Deckard. For the uninitiated, replicants are androids that pose as humans. In the world of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, we are exposed to the aftermath of an Earth that has been ruined by nuclear war. Everywhere is dusty, broken down, deserted, and all in all, dystopian. Due to Earth being in ruins, a large number of the population, at the United Nations advice, have migrated to other planets, thus leaving those with a low IQ on Earth, where the radiation slowly eats at them. You have to pass an IQ test to be allowed to migrate. The world has its own religion, known as mercerism, a 24-hour TV show called Buster Friendly, and weird devices like the empathy box, which is a device humans can use to set their emotions to depressed, sexually aroused, business orientated, etc. Our main character, Deckard, is living with his wife Iran, where the two own a sheep. Animals in this world are signs of social standing. However, your standing is not only predicated on whether that animal is bigger, rarer, or in better health, it is also predicated on whether it is authentic. Deckard and Iran own a fake sheep, an electric sheep. For Deckard, this is shameful and worthy of being hidden. Anyway, the story takes place over the course of a day, and it is on this day that Deckard is given the opportunity to make some serious money. The lead bounty hunter at the station where Deckard works has been injured by a replicant he was attempting to retire. Due to this injury, Deckard is offered the opportunity to retire this android and 5 others, making $1,000 for each one. However, these are not just ordinary replicants. The replicants Deckard must retire have an advanced system installed within them, called the Nexus 6. This essentially means they are smarter and harder to detect as androids. For the rest of the book, we tag along with Deckard as he hunts down all 6 replicants. The story goes on, Deckard finds himself wrestling with the ethics surrounding his profession and trying to blur the line between what is real and what is not. Of the 4 books I read this month, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was my least favourite. Now to start, I don't read science fiction often. I've always been someone who has naturally drifted towards realism. However, despite this book being my least favourite, there were some aspects of it that I liked. The main aspect of the book I enjoyed was Deckard's struggle to justify his profession. I know this wrestling with the soul and consciousness is kickstarted by Rachel Rosen, the daughter of Eldon Rosen, owner of the Rosen Association, the people who manufacture the replicants, who is proven to be a replicant herself by Deckard after Deckard tests her by using the Voight-Kamp scale. However, it is the retiring of the replicant singer Luba Luft that intrigued me more. After retiring the first replicant, Deckard makes his way to an opera house where Luft is practicing, along with others, Mozart's The Magic Flute. Deckard walks into the opera house undetected and takes some time to soak up the music, realizing that she has a great voice despite being a replicant. Once the rehearsal was finished, Deckard follows her into the dressing room to administer the scale. Long story short, Luft pulls a gun on him, calls a policeman, and Deckard winds up in a replicant-controlled police station, which he manages to escape with the help of a bounty hunter working there called Phil Wretch. Deckard and Wretch go back to grab Luft and find her in a museum. They arrest her, and whilst walking to the elevator, Deckard buys Luft a gift she wanted out of the store in the museum. Following this, Luft is gunned down by Wretch in the elevator, and, while still willing to collect the bounty money, Deckard begins to question whether Luft's death was necessary. Was it her voice, sexual attraction, or was it simply the advanced Nexus 6 working its magic on Deckard's fatally empathetic mind? Many moments like this pop up in the book, and they can be fun to ponder. However, where the book falls short for me is the ending. I feel like this book could have gone on a lot longer. It felt a little too short, and the ending felt rushed and inconclusive. At the end, Deckard manages to kill all the replicants, which by the way were incredibly easy to kill. I was expecting some sort of struggle when finishing off these desperate replicants with nothing to lose, but no, they were pretty pathetic. It also seems counterintuitive to the moral questionings that permeate Deckard's role in the story. Despite his supposed inability to continue retiring replicants, particularly females, he makes easy work of them all. I understand there is a lot more to this book, but from a purely entertainment point of view, I didn't think much of it. When looking around online, I've heard that it is a book that marinates in your mind and keeps you pondering the ethical questions Deckard himself had faced throughout the 200 plus pages. Additionally, I've seen people say that they enjoyed the book the second time they read it. This all may be true, but for now I don't know. All I know is that I like the concepts, but not the execution. 2.5 stars out of 5. Thinking this, he wondered if Mozart had had any intuition that the future did not exist, that he had already used up his little time. Maybe I have too, Rick thought, as he watched the rehearsal move along. This rehearsal will end, the performance will end, the singers will die, eventually the last score of music will be destroyed in one way or another. Finally, the name Mozart will vanish, the dust will have won. If not on this planet, then another. We can evade it a while, as the Andes can evade me and exist a finite stretch longer. But I get them, or some other bounty hunter gets them. In a way, he realised, I'm part of the form-destroying process of entropy. The Rosen Association creates, and I unmake, or anyhow so it must seem to them. Fire by Sebastian Junger. Fire was published in 2001 and is Junger's first book following his highly successful The Perfect Storm. I first came across Junger when I stumbled upon a documentary called Restrepo. The documentary is about a group of soldiers fighting in the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan, a place that was considered the deadliest to be stationed at the time. Junger and photojournalist/friend Tim Hetherington were embedded within the Korangal with the American soldiers on and off for a year, and what they captured was intense. After watching the documentary, I bought Junger's book War and immediately became a fan. It was around this time when I also began watching his interviews and stumbled across a lecture Junger did in the early 2000s, which was called An Afternoon with the Writer Sebastian Junger. I've linked it below. During this lecture, Junger describes the job he had before becoming a writer, which was a tree climber. He got the job one day when he was in a bar talking to some guy who owned a tree climbing company. Junger was broke at the time and thought he'd give it a go. Unfortunately, the guy at the bar couldn't employ him full time, but he was willing to train him and use him whenever his services would be required. Junger agreed. Junger found himself loving the job. It had an element of danger alongside intellectual stimulation. Cutting down a tree is not as simple as one might suspect. Junger describes each tree as being like a puzzle that needs to be solved in order to find the best way to bring a tree down as quickly and safely as possible. Anyhow, a year into the job, Junger had gotten good at it. You would think this would minimise the risk of the profession. Well, you would be wrong. In tree work, the ones who get hurt are the beginners and the experienced, complacent workers. Junger was the latter, as one day whilst handling a chainsaw many feet in the air, he accidentally cut his leg open so badly he could see his Achilles tendon. Junger thus had to sit on the sidelines whilst his leg healed up, and it was during this time that he thought of an idea to write about dangerous jobs that are essential. He felt that dangerous jobs were more respected when they were aligned with entertainment, like stuntmen or anyone you'd see on X Games. Junger wasn't putting these people down, but he was interested in the idea that these inessential dangerous jobs got far more praise than the essential ones. An essential one like, say, tree climbing. Thus, Junger wanted to write about the essentials and give them the spotlight. In short, that's what led to the book Fire. The book contains 10 articles written between 1992 to 2001. All of the articles have to do with dangerous jobs and or conditions. They all feature Junger going to dangerous parts of the world and reporting on what he sees, alongside the additional academic essay to provide context for what he is seeing. Among the articles, Junger writes about forest fires, whale harpooning, the forensics of war, guerrilla warfare, and illegal diamond trades. Junger writes like a straight-shooting journalist. His writing does retain some literary sprinkling on the top, maybe just to pull you in with an introduction, but all in all, he merely states the facts as clear and precise a way as possible. To begin with, I just want to say that this book is inconsistent. In Junger's defense, these articles span 9 years, so the quality is going to ebb and flow a bit. Ironically though, what I found was that the earliest and the very latest articles were the most intriguing. Somewhere in the middle, it gets stale. I will get the stale bits out of the way first, so as to enjoy what is, for the most part, a good read. The worst article by far is this 1995 article, The Whale Hunters. In the article, Junger tells the story of Afnil Olivier. Olivier lives on the island of Bequia, which is located in the Grenadines. Bequia was formerly known as a hotspot for whale hunting, a profession Olivier was known for on the island, as he had caught plenty of whales and had a wealth of knowledge concerning the capturing of them. The premise of the article is interesting. Junger provides some anecdotes from Olivier's past heroic hunts and near-death experiences, but where it falls short is in the present time of Junger's arrival. All he really gets to do is meet the man himself, share a few awkward conversations, and then pay a lot of money to be taken out on Olivier's boat called Why Ask? Fitting. The recounting of the history of whale hunting alongside powerhouse countries like the US and Japan throwing their weight around trying to either ban or legalize it is somewhat interesting to read. The problem is that this book is about going to these areas and seeing through the eyes of Junger. However, this is not possible, because barely any whales get near Bequia anymore, which leaves Junger to just imagine what it was like. I'm assuming the seemingly abrupt and unsatisfying ending to this article has a lot to do with not seeing anything. I wouldn't be surprised if Junger had expected to be able to conclude his article on the sighting of a whale, or see Olivier give some in-depth interview. Unfortunately, none of them happened. Now, when it comes to the positives regarding Fire, there are a lot. I won't be able to go into every single article, or we would be here all day. So I'll go into the first two because they're linked, and the last one. The first two are called Fire and Blow Up. What Went Wrong at Storm King Mountain. I didn't realise how naive I was to the logistics of forest fires until I read these two articles. In them, Junger hangs out with firefighters and essentially gathers info on how fires start, how frequent they are, how deadly they are, and how best to control them. Junger even describes how people die when caught in these fires. This clinical and objective aspect of Junger is what I like. I know it's a bit morbid, but it is nonetheless intriguing. I'll give a quote so you too can understand. Dying in a fire is often less a process of burning than of asphyxiation. Their suffering was probably intense, but short-lived. Pathologists looked for carbon in their lungs and upper airways and found none, which meant the victims weren't breathing when the fire passed over them. Their lungs were filled with fluid, their throats were closed in laryngeal spasms, responses to superheated air, and their blood contained toxic levels of carbon monoxide. This gas, given off during incomplete distribution, displaces oxygen in the blood and kills very quickly. The suffering Junger talks about in this quote is in relation to those who died in the South Canyon fire in 1994. The fire took place on Storm King Mountain, located outside Glenwood Springs, Colorado. 14 hotshots, essentially highly experienced wildlife firefighters, and one smoke jumper, that being someone who jumps out of an airplane to get to a fire, were killed. Junger goes into detail on the tragic event in the second article on wildfires called Blow Up: What Went Wrong at Storm King Mountain. Again, we see Junger interview those directly involved, as well as go into the details behind why the fire started and the aftermath. What I particularly appreciate about this article was the way Junger told the story from differing perspectives as it happened. He jumped around the numerous groups of crews involved, explaining how their reactions to their scenarios had either contributed to their survival or death. Overall, a solid start to the book. Lastly, I want to end with the last article of the book called The Lion in Winter. The article is based in Afghanistan and focuses on Ahmad Shah Massoud. Massoud was a highly respected guerrilla fighter who was fighting the Taliban in the early 2000s. Like the other articles, Junger provides a boots-on-the-ground style of reporting mixed with his usual contextual filling in to provide the reader with background. The detailing of Massoud's aura and accomplishments on the battlefield makes for a fascinating read. Massoud, despite being vastly outnumbered, had fended off the Soviets in the 1980s when they were trying to enter Afghanistan through the Panjshir Valley, located in northeastern Afghanistan. Junger provides plenty of detail on Massoud, but what I found most interesting was Junger's self-reflection on the horrors he witnessed on this particular trip, and how he had to force himself not to look away at times. After a failed mission on the front lines, Massoud's men, who had walked right into a minefield, had turned up at the hospital Junger and his photographer friend had been waiting at. Many wounded men, ravaged by mines, were being thrown onto tables lit only by a singular kerosene lantern. Junger describes the devastating effect of a landmine on a human. One guy lost his leg from the ankle down, another the shin, and some guy the entire leg. Watching this, Junger eventually has to step out of the tent and take a breather. Checking himself, Junger realizes that if he is to cover these wars, these dangerous scenarios, jobs, whatever, then he is to cover all of it. To step out when things get too heated is to miss a vital part of the subject being reported on. Telling himself this, he goes back in. Junger is a great writer and journalist. I appreciate the approach he takes towards his subjects. He is not too disconnected or overly partisan. I like his simple and objective approach, and how he occasionally adds in the occasional literary flair here and there. As I said before, the middle of the book does drop off at parts, particularly with the whale hunting article. But overall, it is an engaging, but a little dated read. I still prefer this book War to this, but it was definitely not a waste of time. 3.5 stars out of 5. The medics worked quickly and wordlessly in the lamplight, wrapping the stumps of the legs with gauze. The wounded men would be flown out by helicopter the next day and would eventually wind up in a hospital in Tajikistan. This is the war, Reza hissed over and over again as he shot photos. This is what war means. Reza had covered plenty of wars and seen plenty of this in his life, but I hadn't. I ducked out of the tent and stood in the cold darkness, leaning against a wall. Dogs were barking in the distance, and a soldier shouted into his radio that the wounded were coming in, and they needed more medicine now. I thought about what Reza had said, and after a while I went back inside. This is the war too. You have to look straight at it, I told myself. You have to look straight at all of it, or you have no business being here at all. Men Without Women by Haruki Murakami, published in 2014. Haruki Murakami is a polarizing writer. Whenever the topic of Murakami is brought up, the reaction of those involved falls to extremes of emotion. Some love him. His ability to write books that feel so lucid and ethereal, whilst retaining the everyday modern banalities of our lives, is invigorating. Murakami has a formula of jazz, wells, cats, and the everyday that somehow never gets boring for these people. There is a certain atmosphere his writing exudes, an atmosphere that favours the types who prefer autumn and winter to spring and summer, who are introverts, who are, in most cases, alone. Then there are the others, the non-believers, the people who don't care for the repetitious themes and motifs, the people who want structure, neatly wrapped up conclusions, and meaning behind every word. I sympathise with both sides, and often find myself running to each argument depending on the book I am reading. Norwegian Wood was my first Murakami book. I loved it. I still love it. It was the only book I read in 2021 that I gave a perfect 5 out of 5. If it wasn't for this book, my favourite of that year would have been Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, but I digress. Next up was Kafka on the Shore. I didn't like it. 2 out of 5. I think I was led astray by Norwegian Wood, which, unlike the vast majority of Murakami's work, is based in reality. I was not prepared for Kafka on the Shore, so I'm willing to someday give it another go with an open mind. Soon after, I read Sputnik Sweetheart. Not bad. 3 out of 5. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I thought it was an interesting enough read, but not quite the Norwegian Wood I'd loved back in 2021. But then, I met its match. The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. This book was great. 4.5 stars out of 5, maybe even 5 out of 5. I'll need to read it again. It is a hefty book that has stuck in my mind ever since I read it in September of 2022. The circumstances of that book related to my own in little ways that made it even sweeter. Anyway, it took 11 months until I finally tackled another Murakami book, that being Men Without Women. Men Without Women is a short story collection published in 2014. There are 7 stories in the collection that all deal with the theme of, you guessed it, men without women. These men have either lost a woman due to death, divorce, affairs, etc. The stories are melancholic, dreamy, and romantic. They all fall under a typical Murakami spell of ranging degrees of surrealism. I just want to say this now. I thought this was another great Murakami book. I think these stories are Murakami at his best. The atmosphere and emotions he can evoke out of the simplest language always surprise me. Murakami proves that a rich vocabulary is not necessary when you want to say something worth remembering. Now, whilst I found Men Without Women to be the best thing I read this month, I do want to begin by stating my grievances with the short story collection. Mainly those grievances boil down to the last 2 stories, in that they just weren't that good. The second to last story, Samsa in Love, was just boring. It was about a guy, Samsa, who wakes up in a boarded up bedroom in Prague and doesn't know how to work his own body or what he is doing or anything. I know Murakami is a Franz Kafka fan, so I think he was going for an inverse of Kafka's famous short story The Metamorphosis. Murakami does hint towards Samsa's being an insect in a what might have been past life, but in the usual Murakami fashion, he doesn't fully explain it. Eventually, a woman comes to the house Samsa is in to change her lock. She is hunched over and resembles an insect in her gait. The two talk. Samsa asks to see the woman again, and eventually, she leaves. And Samsa decides he is going to continue learning how to live in this new human form. I think what made me weary of this story was its placement. As I said, this is the second to last story, and so I was kind of fatigued by the reoccurring themes. I think Murakami would have benefited from not toning down on the excitement in the stories later in the collection. It kills the momentum. The last story, Men Without Women, was again toned down. However, this one felt intentional when considering its placement, so it's not as egregious. Men Without Women felt like the instrumental closer of the book. I know Murakami likes to link music and writing, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was his thought process. It was almost like a reprise of all the other stories. The story itself is essentially the ruminating of an unnamed narrator who had just heard of the death of a former lover. Now to the great and good stuff. Falling into the good category is the story Scheherazade. The rest, Drive My Car, Yesterday, Independent Organ, and Kino are great. I don't have time to go into all of them, so I will focus on Kino, as it is the best story of the bunch. Little note, the first story, Drive My Car, was adapted into a film released in 2021 of the same name. I haven't seen it, but I plan to, as I've heard good stuff. But anyway, Kino. Kino is by far the best story. It is a story of a guy named Kino who opens a bar at his aunt's old place after discovering that his wife has been cheating on him. Previously, he had worked as a sports equipment maker. His job was to convince sports stores to buy his brand of shoes, as well as get athletes to try them out. Kino had got this job after suffering an injury as a long-distance runner, which ended his chances of pursuing running any further. On his coach's advice, he took the sports equipment maker job. After coming home early from work one day and finding his wife with another man, Kino decides to uproot his life and thus opens the bar called simply Kino. In the bar, Kino would read, play jazz records, tend to the cat sleeping in the corner, and serve whatever customers happened to stumble across the bar. One tall, bold man, later identified as Kamita, would visit the bar regularly and would sit in the same chair at the end of the bar every time. It was here where he would order a beer and then a whiskey. He would read whilst he drank. One day, two men walk into the bar, one big, one small, and sit at a table drinking. The two men begin to argue, and when Kino came to calm them down, they both threatened him. Kamita steps in, takes the men outside, and it is implied that he beats them up, although we never see it. A few days following the event, Kino sleeps with a female customer. The customer often came into the bar with another man, but this time had come alone. Once closing time had neared, the woman and Kino talk, and then the woman abruptly shows Kino cigarette burns on her back. The woman would continue returning to the bar in the following days, but always with the same man she had come with prior. The two then slept together. Next, Kino's wife comes to the bar to settle the divorce papers. Kino signs everything without any fuss, and his wife then begins to express her apologies. Kino seems almost surprised by this. It was after this scene that the cat from the bar disappeared. It used to just walk in every once in a while, but now it hadn't returned for weeks. Additionally, snakes had started to appear around the perimeter of the bar. Eventually, Kamita returns and warns Kino that he must leave in a cryptic way that suggests he has fucked up at one point or another, but hasn't realised it. Kino, without any resistance, leaves. Kamita told Kino that he must send a postcard to his aunt every Monday and Thursday. He is not allowed to write a message or put his name on it. He also must not stay in one place for too long. And so, that's what Kino does, but not for long. Eventually, Kino, whilst in a hotel in Kumamoto, breaks and leaves a message on his next postcard. The following day, things get very weird. At 2:15, an incessant knocking on the door begins. The knock pounds and doubles like a heartbeat. Kino lies in bed and realizes he had been caught between two extremes. He was unable to accept the pain he felt from his wife's betrayal. Despite this, Kino lifts up the covers over his face, covers his ears with his hands, and shuts his eyes, but the knocking continues. Kino still desperately tries to block the knocking out, and whilst doing so races through all the past events of the story. The knocking is now coming from the window that looks out on a rainy day 8 stories up. Everything intensifies. Kino clambers shut tighter and tighter, and eventually acquiesces to weeping between the covers as the rain continues to cool the outside earth. Now, that all sounds mental. When saying you like a Murakami story to someone who is uninitiated, you sound crazy. The Wind Up Bird Chronicle, man, you've got to read it. It's about this guy and his cat goes missing, so he goes looking for it, but then his wife goes missing too, and then he starts sitting in this well, and then he starts being visited by strange characters, etc. I know how it sounds, but trust me, it's good, man. You'll love it. Just give it a read. My point is, any Murakami book can be a hard sell, and I particularly feel that way with this story, Kino. However, if you've read Murakami before, you'll understand. There is a lot more to the story merely than what I've described, but what I've given you there is the basic outline. The story is essentially about inactivity and the damage a person can do, either to themselves or others, by being passive. The hotel room at the end of the story, I believe, represents Kino's heart, and Kino is basically being forced to face the hurt and pain that he has kept deep down for so long. His bar, Kino, is like a refuge. It is in the middle ground between extremes of emotion. When he sees the girl with burns, he does nothing. When his wife apologizes, he acts almost confused and nonchalant. When the cat disappears, he accepts it. When he can't run, he takes a job role that serves others actually doing the running. Inactivity killed the cat in this one. Sometimes a bit of curiosity and action is required. You can't just flow through life without a backbone, or at least that was my interpretation. I will definitely be reading this one again. Discovering the meaning of a Murakami book is like having something you've forgotten on the tip of your tongue. It's like 80% there, but you can't quite put it together. I recommend this book to all fringes of the Murakami spectrum. The realists, the non-believers, and the surrealists. I think everyone can get something out of this book. 4 out of 5 stars. The proposition that we can look into another person's heart with perfect clarity strikes me as a fool's game. I don't care how well we think we should understand them, or how much we love them. All it can do is cause us pain. Examining your own heart, however, is another matter. I think it's possible to see what's in there if you work hard enough at it. So in the end, maybe that's the challenge, to look inside your own heart as perceptively and seriously as you can, and to make peace with what you find there. If we hope to truly see another person, we have to start by looking within ourselves. That's everything. Again, I implore you to give me suggestions for stuff to read. It doesn't even have to be fiction either. It could be self-help, philosophy, some sort of fucking history book, something, I don't know. Just give me suggestions, I'm open to them all. Just comment them down below, and I'll stick them on the list. And again, if I read them, I'll mention you. Thank you for watching.